At a major bank, a well-dressed black businessman stepped inside, expecting a smooth, on-time meeting, one that had been scheduled and confirmed well in advance. But as he waited, others who arrived after him were greeted and ushered in first. He sat quietly, overlooked, for nearly 2 hours. What the staff didn't realize was that he wasn't just another loan applicant, and what he was about to do next would shake the foundations of this unjust system. It was exactly 1 hour and 30 minutes. That's how long they made him wait before anything changed. The glass doors of Ridgefield Trust and Capital slid open with a soft hiss, letting a gentle stream of cool, conditioned air spill out onto the sidewalk, and with it came the familiar mix of scents. Freshly brewed dark roast, the faint polish of high-end leather chairs, and the subtle metallic tang of money. The place smelled like power, controlled, calculated, and quiet. Kieran Holmes stepped inside. Tall, with a runner's build and skin the shade of deep bronze, he moved with the kind of quiet confidence that turned heads without asking to. His jaw was clean-shaven, his cheekbones sharply defined, and his eyes, dark, steady, and alert, missed nothing. A faint scar ran just above his left brow, the only visible remnant of a younger, harder version of himself. Today, though, he wore a charcoal blazer tailored with precision, crisp slacks, and a pale blue shirt that brought just enough contrast without drawing too much attention. Every detail was intentional, sharp, respectful, prepared. He adjusted the line of his blazer across his shoulders. He wasn't nervous. He had stood in enough rooms, pitched to enough rooms, built enough rooms to know he didn't need to prove himself anymore. What he needed was for them to see that. His meeting was set for 11 o'clock sharp, confirmed twice by email, once over the phone. There was no reason to expect anything less than professionalism. The lobby was the kind of space designed to say everything without saying anything. Sleek glass panels, mahogany reception desks, floors that shined like polished mirrors, and gold accents that caught the morning sun in just the right places to remind you this is where money lives. A soft hum of voices and the click of dress shoes echoed faintly through the room, but everything about the environment was calm, intentional, and well-rehearsed. Kieran approached the front desk. The woman behind it, with a nameplate that read Alyssa, barely looked up. Her hair was tied in a perfect bun, her makeup just enough to suggest professionalism, not invitation. She glanced at him, not really seeing him, then said in a clipped, automatic voice, "Welcome to Ridgefield Trust. Do you have an appointment?" "Kieran Holmes," he replied, setting his slim leather portfolio gently on the counter, not slamming it, not rushing, just placing it there with purpose. "I'm meeting with Sienna Cross at 11. Alyssa tapped at her keyboard with quick, detached movements, her eyes barely moving across the screen. "You're on the schedule," she said, tone flat, unrevealing. "You can have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." He nodded, already sensing the lack of warmth in her voice, but he didn't let it show. He turned and stepped back into the seating area, choosing a chair by the tall windows where thin lines of sunlight spilled across the marble floors like a sundial. The city moved steadily outside the glass, but in here, time felt slower. A few professionals gathered by the phone booths nearby, talking about quarterly reports, stock dips, and market projections, the kind of background noise you heard in places where people belonged. Kieran didn't fidget. He didn't pace. He rested one ankle over his knee and tapped a slow rhythm on the handle of his briefcase. He always arrived early. It was part of who he was. Showing up prepared, showing up ahead of the clock. At 10:59, he checked his watch once. At 11:05, he glanced again. Still calm. It was a bank after all. Delays happened. 5 minutes wasn't worth noticing. But as the minutes kept ticking, 11:10, 11:20, his attention began to shift. Not out of impatience, but out of observation. A white man in a light gray suit, maybe early 30s, approached the desk and gave his name. Less than 5 minutes later, a sharply dressed associate appeared and led him past the frosted glass doors to the executive offices. No wait, no questions. Then, a woman in a pearl-white blazer, no appointment from what Kieran could hear, greeted Alyssa like an old friend. They exchanged pleasantries, a laugh or two, and not 2 minutes later she too was escorted through the same doors. Kieran's name still hadn't been called. He checked his watch again. It was now 11:30, full minutes past the time of his scheduled meeting. His fingers tapped lightly against the side of his case again, but this time it wasn't to kill time. It was to think. Something was off. He watched closely as a pattern emerged. People came in, were greeted differently, treated differently, prioritized differently. Some got smiles, some got immediate service, some walked like they owned the place, others, like him, were asked to wait. The difference? They weren't the ones still sitting there, he was. And yet he stayed composed. Kirion Holmes had dealt with this before, this exact type of invisible gatekeeping, this subtle game where people could always say it wasn't intentional, that it was just a scheduling mix-up, that "we're so sorry, we've just been slammed this morning." He knew the lines, he'd heard them before, but this time he wasn't going to let it pass without acknowledgement. By the time the clock above the lobby entrance read 11:37, the polished image of Ridgefield Trust had started to lose its luster. Not on the surface. The glass still gleamed, the marble still shone, the coffee still brewed quietly behind the receptionist's desk, but in the details. Details that Kirion Holmes never missed. Like the way Alyssa's expression shifted when certain people walked in, the way her tone smoothed out, just a little softer, just a little higher when she greeted them. The way her posture straightened with recognition. He saw it, all of it. And he remembered. A young man, tie loosened, talking quickly into his Bluetooth, barely slowed down as he approached the desk. Alyssa looked up, her features warming with familiarity. "Hey there, Mr. Harmon," she said, voice light, smile present. "You're early today." The man chuckled, nodded, and, before he even finished his call, a banker emerged and motioned him through the frosted doors with a quick nod. Not a minute passed. Kirion looked down at his watch again, 11:41. 41 minutes past his scheduled time. He leaned back in the chair, slow and measured, his fingers tightening around the strap of his briefcase. Still no word, no apology, no acknowledgement, and that silence was no longer just inconvenient, it was intentional. Or at least, it felt like it, and that's what mattered. A tall woman in a navy blue wrap dress strutted into the lobby, designer handbag tucked at her side, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't even lower her voice as she talked, laughing softly, polished nails flicking through the air as she gestured mid-sentence. Alyssa perked up immediately. "Good morning, Mrs. Lancaster," she said, with a tone that could have passed for genuine delight. "How are you today?" The woman gave a light smile, offered a casual wave, still on the call. Didn't even slow down. She didn't have to. Within moments, yet again, another associate, young, well-dressed, eager, appeared to guide her toward the executive offices. No waiting, no need for appointments, no questions. Kirion's eyes narrowed slightly. His jaw flexed once, then settled. He'd seen this before, in corporate meetings, in investor rooms, in the looks people gave him when they didn't recognize his face or assumed he hadn't earned the seat he was in. And each time, the sting was never in what they said. It was in what they didn't. In what they chose not to see. At 11:46, Kirion stood up and walked back to the desk. His steps weren't rushed, but they weren't slow either. They were deliberate, the kind of movement that carried purpose, controlled but firm. Alyssa looked up again, slower this time. Her expression hadn't changed, but something in her eyes flickered, like she knew the moment had arrived. "Excuse me," Kirion said, keeping his voice even but firm, every word chosen with care. "Has Miss Cross been informed that I've been waiting?" Alyssa let out a short breath through her nose. Not a sigh, exactly, more like she was gently annoyed by being pulled from her screen. "She's just finishing up with another client," she said, still not quite meeting his gaze, already clicking away on her keyboard again. Kirion didn't move. He waited, expecting something more. An offer to check again, a time estimate, any small gesture that might suggest he wasn't being ignored. But nothing came. "How long do you estimate she'll be?" he asked, his voice a degree tighter now, controlled but not apologetic. Alyssa shrugged, barely looking at the screen before saying, "It shouldn't be much longer." Those words, so casual, so dismissive, they landed harder than any outright insult. Not just what she said, but how she said it, as if he were the inconvenience, as if his presence in that lobby was more of a burden than a booked appointment on their calendar. There was no urgency in her tone, no effort to confirm anything, just a placeholder phrase meant to brush him back into silence. And then it happened again, right in front of him. A woman in a coral blazer breezed in, her heels tapping quickly across the marble. She didn't give a name. She didn't approach the desk. She just smiled and waved casually at Alyssa, who practically lit up like a store window in December. "Hi again, just heading up," the woman said with ease. Alyssa nodded without hesitation. "Of course," she chirped, her voice suddenly bright and present, and right on cue a banker stepped out and opened the door for her without a single word exchanged. Kieran didn't look away, didn't blink. He took in every step of it, the effortless access, the subtle cues, the way rules bent without question for some. He turned slowly toward Alyssa again. "So," he said with a calm that was sharper than steel, "do appointments matter here? Or is it just first come, first serve for the people who look the part?" For the first time, Alyssa's face twitched. Barely, a flicker of discomfort crept into her tone. "Sir, I told you." "She'll be with you soon." That word again. Soon. A word that meant nothing. A word that gave them an out. A promise with no weight behind it. Kieran stood there for another beat, then nodded once, just once, and turned back to his seat. But something inside him had shifted. This wasn't just about a meeting anymore. This wasn't just about delay. It was about something else entirely, and that was going to have consequences. By 12:03 the lobby had gone quiet again. Not empty, just quieter. Most of the people who had come in after Kieran Holmes were already gone, tucked behind glass walls and closed doors, sipping bottled water while talking rates and returns. And Kieran? He was still there, still seated in the same chair by the window, still watching, still waiting. 58 minutes past the time he was scheduled to be seen. A few feet away, a young teller leaned against the counter, chatting with an older man in khakis and a golf polo. Their voices weren't loud, but in a space as controlled as Ridgefield Trust, even casual conversation carried. "Yeah," the man said, chuckling as he rested an elbow on the ledge. "Told her to just walk in. She doesn't even need an appointment. You know how it is." The teller laughed. "Easy, familiar. Well, for Mrs. Lancaster," he said with a shrug, "we always make exceptions." Kieran's jaw locked. His hands stilled. That was it. That was the moment. The confirmation. Not suspicion, not a guess. The truth. Spoken out loud with a grin and a shrug. Like favoritism was just another part of the architecture. Like some names earned doors that never closed. He stood up, not fast, not angry, decisively. The room didn't shift, but something in him did. The quiet fire that had been burning beneath the surface now moved into his spine, into his chest, into his step. He didn't look at Alyssa this time. He didn't ask. He didn't wait. He walked past her desk, past her suddenly wide eyes, and made a direct line for the frosted glass doors that separated the lobby from the offices. "Sir?" Alyssa started, her voice sharper now, but he didn't stop. He pushed open the door with one hand and stepped inside. The hallway was cool and silent, lined with evenly spaced recessed lights and nameplates in brushed gold. Doors framed in mahogany, some closed, some cracked open. Not a single person stopped him, and he didn't slow down. He knew exactly where he was going. Third door on the left, Vice President Lending Division, Sienna Cross. He didn't knock. He opened the door. Sienna was seated behind a wide desk, her laptop open, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wasn't in a meeting. She wasn't finishing up. She was alone, typing. Calm. Until she looked up. Her expression shifted the instant she saw him. First surprise, then annoyance. She sat up straighter, her fingers freezing mid-mashment. "Mr. Holmes," she said, voice clipped, like a teacher catching a student out of line. "You were supposed to wait in the lobby until you were called." Kieran's gaze didn't waver. He didn't sit. He didn't apologize. "I did," he said, his voice level, but the weight of those two words hit the room like thunder. "For over an hour." Sienna's mouth pressed into a tight line. Her fingers tapped once on the desk, then stopped. She seemed to search for something in his tone. Defensiveness, maybe, or aggression, but what she found was something worse. Composure. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable composure. "Please," she said after a moment, gesturing to the chair across from her, "have a seat." Kieran sat, not because she invited him, but because he chose to, and she knew it. There was a beat of silence between them, just long enough to be uncomfortable. "I apologize for the delay," she said, forcing the words out through a polite smile. "We've been extremely busy today." "Busy?" Kieran repeated, letting the word hang there in the air like smoke. "That's interesting. I counted 6 people, minimum, who were ushered back while I was sitting out there, some without appointments, some who walked in and didn't even check the schedule." Sienna blinked, then cleared her throat, reaching for the folder on her desk. "There must have been a miscommunication," she said quickly. "I wasn't aware." "That I was waiting?" Kieran finished, his voice just sharp enough to cut through her sentence. "You mean to say no one told you?" "I'm saying it wasn't intentional," she snapped back, then immediately softened her tone. "These things happen. Sometimes wires get crossed." "Right," Kieran said quietly. "Wires." There was tension in the room now, thick, unmistakable. Sienna shifted in her chair, the smile gone, replaced by something colder. She opened the folder in front of her, as if that would move things along. "Let's discuss your application," she said, sliding the pages slightly toward herself. "While your portfolio is certainly impressive, the current lending environment is highly restrictive. We'll need more assurances before we can move forward." The door behind Kieran swung open. The air shifted, so did Sienna's face. 3 men stepped into the room, all in tailored suits, their movements quiet but commanding. They didn't knock, they didn't announce themselves, they didn't need to. And at the front of them stood Harvey Langston, CEO of Ridgefield Trust and Capital. His eyes scanned the room, sharp and calculated, until they landed on Kieran. Recognition lit his face. "Kieran," Harvey said, breaking into a wide, surprised smile. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sienna froze. Kieran stood, reaching out to shake Harvey's hand with a steady grip. "Been a while," Kieran said smoothly. "It has," Harvey replied, clapping a hand on Kieran's shoulder. "Still running home strategies?" "Still growing it." Harvey's smile faded as he turned toward Sienna, his voice dropping into something cooler. "How long has Mr. Holmes been waiting?" Silence. Sienna opened her mouth, but no words came. Kieran let it breathe. "About an hour and a half," he said, calm, direct, unflinching. Harvey's jaw didn't tighten, not visibly, but Kieran saw the shift, the flicker in his eyes, the shift in posture. The weight of that sentence didn't need theatrics, it just sat there, heavy and undeniable. "A scheduling issue," Sienna stammered. "It wasn't—" Harvey didn't look at her. "You should have called me," he told Kieran. "I would have had someone walk you up personally." Kieran gave a slight, knowing smile. "Didn't think I'd need to." Harvey shook his head once, then turned back to Sienna. The smile was gone now, completely. His voice was calm, but it carried finality like a blade. "Sienna, step outside." Her face drained of color. Her hands gripped the edge of the desk for a half-second before she rose. "Of course," she said, then exited without another word. And when the door clicked shut behind her, the real conversation began. When the door clicked shut behind Sienna Cross, the room held its breath. Harvey Langston remained standing for a moment longer, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on Kieran, not as a CEO to a client, but as one heavyweight to another. Then, with a sigh that carried more frustration than fatigue, he moved toward the chair across from Kieran and sat down. The other 2 executives remained standing, silent, watching, their presence heavy but secondary. "I don't know what happened out there," Harvey said finally, voice low, even, but every word carried the weight of decision-making power. "But I can promise you one thing, Kieran. This isn't how we do things." Kieran leaned back slightly, arms resting on the edges of the chair, his expression unreadable. "Seems like it is." Harvey didn't respond right away. He held that line in the air like it had teeth, letting the implication bleed through before continuing. "Not with people like you," he said, then immediately stopped himself, correcting the phrasing. "Not with people who bring value, who know how this game works." That made Kieran smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "That's the problem, Harvey. The game, the rules, who they bend for, who they break for." Harvey ran a hand over his tie, exhaled again, then turned slightly to the remaining executives. "Give us the room." They nodded and stepped out without a word, closing the door behind them with a quiet finality. When it was just the two of them, the pretense dropped. "Tell me exactly what happened," Harvey said, no more corporate charm, no distractions. And Kieran did. Not dramatically, not embellished, just facts. He told him what time he arrived, what was said, who was escorted in before him, how he was treated like a name on a forgotten list. The looks, the tones, the indifference. Elisa's neutral voice, Sienna's casual disregard, the unspoken hierarchy built into the very floor tiles. He recounted it with the precision of someone who'd spent years learning how to catalog every slight, every unspoken message in a room designed to ignore people like him unless they came with headlines or a personal referral. Harvey didn't interrupt, didn't defend, just listened, jaw tight, fingers steepled, and when Kieran finished, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged. "I appreciate you telling me," Harvey said finally, his voice a touch lower now, almost confessional. "And I'll be honest with you, I'm pissed." Kieran tilted his head slightly. "Why? Because I walked through the wrong door? Or because someone else saw me waiting there first?" Harvey let out a short, humorless laugh. "Because this is the kind of thing that wrecks institutions," he said, now leaning forward. "We've spent the last 10 years trying to build this place into something that holds weight, where clients feel respected, where we don't get stories circulating about favoritism or neglect. And now I've got to clean up a mess I didn't even know was being made, because someone down the chain thought it was okay to treat a man like you like a walk-in." Kieran didn't blink. "I wasn't treated like a walk-in. I was treated like I didn't belong in the room." The line hit harder than either of them expected. Harvey didn't argue. He didn't need to. Instead, he reached across the desk, opened the folder Kieran had brought with him, and flipped through the first few pages. He didn't get far. Just a glance at the financials, a look at the expansion plans, the balance sheet, the projected ROI. "This is rock solid," Harvey muttered, more to himself than to Kieran. "It was never in question," Kieran replied. Harvey sat back, rubbing a hand along the edge of his jaw. Then, without another word, he picked up the desk phone, pressed one button, and waited. "Bring me a fast-track packet," he said, "for home strategies. Yes, immediately." He hung up and turned back to Kieran. "You should have had this approved 2 hours ago. I'm fixing that now." But Kieran didn't nod, didn't thank him. He let the moment sit. Let Harvey feel the weight of it. "Fixing this for me doesn't fix the problem," Kieran said calmly. "It fixes your risk. It protects your story. But it doesn't fix the system that let it happen." Harvey's face didn't change, but his eyes did. Something behind them hardened. Respect, maybe, or guilt, or both. "I know," he said quietly. "Believe me, we'll be having a long conversation about that." Kieran stood, gathering his portfolio. "Good," he said simply, then turned toward the door. But just before he left, he paused, looked back once. "And Harvey," he added, voice steady, words slow, "next time someone like me walks through that lobby, make damn sure they don't have to earn the respect they already deserve." The door opened, and this time he didn't look back. As Kieran stepped back into the lobby, the air felt different. Same temperature, same quiet hum of conversation, same faint scent of coffee and leather, but everything around him had shifted, not the furniture, not the walls. The power. It had moved. He carried it now, and everyone in the room felt it, even if they couldn't quite name it. Elisa looked up from behind the reception desk. She didn't say anything this time. The script was gone. So was the indifference. Her fingers hovered awkwardly over the keyboard, like she wasn't sure whether to offer another excuse or just stay silent. He didn't break stride, didn't stop, but just before he reached the door he paused, barely, and glanced back at her. Not to punish her, not to intimidate her, just so she'd remember his face, so the next time someone sat where he sat, dressed like he dressed, looked how he looked, she'd think twice before deciding they were less important. Outside, the summer heat hit his skin like a slow exhale. The sun gleamed off the glass of Ridgefield Trust, its pristine exterior reflecting the sky like nothing had ever cracked beneath the surface. But Kiera knew better. Today the cracks had formed, quiet ones, deep ones, the kind that didn't make noise but left marks. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. One new email, subject line loan approved. No pleasantries, no back and forth, just a confirmation, as if that hour and a half hadn't happened at all. He let out a low breath, thumbed the screen off and slipped it back into his jacket. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. But it wasn't about winning. It wasn't about the loan, not really, because this had never just been about paperwork. It wasn't about signatures or interest rates. It was about something much older, much deeper. It was about how rooms decide who gets seen, who gets heard, who gets believed, and how, too often, people like him were asked to wait for permission to be respected, told to be patient, to sit quietly, to take whatever space was left over after the favorites had been called forward. But not today. Today someone had to answer for it. Today someone had to explain. And maybe next time, just maybe, the process wouldn't come with that invisible weight, the kind you couldn't name but always felt pressing on your chest the moment you walked through the door. Kieran walked to his car, calm, collected, briefcase swinging lightly at his side. The sun was hot now, higher in the sky, and he didn't rush, no need. The point had been made, and as he reached the door, his mind turned not just to himself, but to everyone who'd ever been told soon when what they really meant was never. To everyone who'd ever sat in a lobby, watching time pass while respect slipped further out of reach. He opened the car door, paused for one final breath, and said, just under his breath, quiet enough only for himself to hear, but firm enough to echo long after, respect isn't given, it's demanded. And today he got exactly what he came for.